without much ado, let me continue. And I'm going to share with you our concepts on the shoulder rehab program and that we have indigenized to our local needs and sort of a cookbook recipe program. And we'll share that with you. I'm not going to give bells and whistles because I'll just share the concepts that we have done. Now, to be honest, most of us understand that amongst all the joints, the
Yeah,
shoulder
yeah,
is
yeah. I
the
know.
most difficult one to rehabilitate, and it's always challenging because of several issues. Now, if I look at the design of the
Yeah,
shoulder,
yeah. We
there
meet
are
in the.
some feature of the shoulders that are absolutely impressive and fantastic. And at the same
Definitely,
time,
yes.
there are some concepts that if you look at, and I look at them at absolute ridicule, to have such a loose capsule, no real ligament as such, and the fact that there are two tendons that passing right through the joint
Another left, another
makes
one of
them
this. Do the
very
second one.
vulnerable. So these are the things that spoil the chances of a rehab therapist to recover the patient. Now, the posture itself will affect the function of the shoulder, and the suprascapular nerve, I find it is often neglected because not often do clinicians understand the role of the suprascapular nerve, which kind of denervates the rotator cuff, and you end up rehabilitating and not getting any rotator cuff recruitment. So that makes our job very, very challenging. Let's start with some of the biomechanics concepts of a frozen shoulder, which is known with a plethora of terms. There's so much diversity in what we call it, but at the end of the day, it still remains an enigma. And if any therapist or clinician today understands frozen shoulder, then I think he's got the answer for global warming. And I must confess, after 20 years of practice, we're still struggling to find out what exactly causes frozen shoulder and why it undoes itself and automatically gets better after a period of time. So truly, if anybody has really suffered frozen shoulder, only he can empathize with another patient. The triad of interminable pain, severe function loss, and sleep loss cannot be alleviated by painkillers and conventional rehab, and it just takes ages. Unlike a rotator cuff tear patient, unlike an impingement patient, this is something that defies treatment. And you give the same treatment to all your patients, not everybody responds similarly. Taking from Andre Roy and Jones' work from JSES 2002, even after 1.5 years, when they have auto recovered, they still remain stiff terminally. They still have weakness in their rotator cuff. So it's not all done. And so it cannot be automatic. And then we have different phases of adhesive capsulitis. I can't fathom how the shoulder understands that it's 3 months now, let's move to the frozen phase. So not every patient follows the written rule. So each one is different. Some of them will recover on their own within 6 weeks by the time they get their appointment coming through. And the others are absolutely miserable even after 9 months. Now let's consider some of the biomechanics of the frozen shoulder. But firstly, you must understand that this is one of the conditions that actually restricts your external and internal rotation both. Now that's strange because you would expect that if there was an anterior pathology related to subscap, you lose your external rotation. If you had a posterior pathology, if you have a teres minor infras problem, you'd lose your external rotation. But here is one pathology. Apart from primary osteoarthritis of the shoulder, I don't know any other pathology that will restrict both internal and external rotation simultaneously. So the external rotation is, I can understand, I can justify. The internal rotation is inexplicable. And because the biceps is involved in restricting internal rotation, it is the last movement to be restored back again. So let's see if we understand these concepts. So this is the rotation arc. So every internal and external rotator or every agonist antagonist has its own rotation arc or a rotation ratio. Let's say it is X here. And when you have a tightness of the infra or the subscapularis or the rotator interval or the anterior structures, that gets narrowed, and then you get a obligate anterior translation. So now look at the role of the force couples here in the axial plane. You have a weak infraspinatus, you have a very strong subscapularis, internal rotation, and then that's drawing the head anteriorly towards the coracoid, and then the subscap gets stuck to the conjoint tendon or the short head of biceps. That could lead to a fixed internal rotation contracture. So now you have restricted external rotation and restricted internal rotation. Look at case 2 here, that when we know that in frozen shoulder, the biceps is the most inflamed organ there. And invariably, because the biceps is inflamed, if you now take your hand behind your back, you would see that you're stretching your biceps there. Because it's inflamed, then it's going to restrict the internal rotation significantly, and you'll end up with a zero internal rotation. I really can't fathom the role of biceps in the shoulder joint. And unless it's its march towards extinction as an atavistic tendon, the biceps, I think, remains as an organ where pain emanates from the shoulder all the time. And then the third sequence here, that when somebody has a restricted external rotation because the entire anterior capsule is stuck to the coracoid, they will lose their external rotation. The greater tuberosity will not be able to clear the acromion. They developed impingement and restricted abduction. So this probably is the whole sequence where there's a global loss of range of movement, but there are different entities involved in restricting these. And the challenge of this therapist is to work on 3 different entities simultaneously. Some smart therapist who understands this pathophysiology is going to work on each one by one and progressively improvise the patient. But if you just generically give same exercises to all the patients, then it's unlikely that they will respond. Now, there are several variables that affect the outcome of the frozen shoulder. Now, typically diabetes and hypothyroid are well known, and these are patients who wouldn't do so well in the long term. But to me, secondary frozen shoulder, like the post-surgery, post-fracture, and post-manipulation under anesthesia stiff shoulders are probably the worst. They defy the best therapists, and they will take an enormous time to get even a mite better. Now, judging by the premise that a restricted external rotation is going to affect abduction and the entire range of movement, and for strengthening, you need some excursion of external rotation, and the fact that it is zero, we devised this study 2 years back, and that was based on the premise that if the rotator interval is tight, then we give a 20 cc normal saline injection, no steroids involved, and that is given ultrasound guided in the focal area. So this is a high volume USG guided extra-articular, the huge study that we did for digital capsulitis. And that has kind of made a big difference to our frozen shoulder patients. It's not rocket science. All we are doing is creating an external movement so that even if we can improvise a little bit of 30 degrees of external rotation, our therapists will get an opportunity to rehabilitate and strengthen their shoulders. So this is an example of a patient who's got very restricted external rotation, just coming up to barely 10 degrees, 15 degrees there. And then the next video is after the 20 cc normal saline injection, and you can see an instant improvement to almost 40 degrees here. So coming to our PSRP, which is the Pune Shoulder Rehab Program, we believe it's a bottom to top approach. So we work on the basic that they come for a robust 2-week exercise program, which is supervised. And then they should be 50% better in terms of pain, in terms of movement, and in terms of rotator cuff strength. If they achieve this all 3, then they're qualified to move on to the home program, which they'll do for 4 to 6 weeks. As any right-minded therapist would agree, we don't use any modalities. We try not to give them any analgesics. And I consider myself as the chairman against the society for giving steroid injections. The program is time-bound, so there's pressure on us to give the results in the first 2 weeks on all 3 counts. And we measure their UCLA scores on day 1, and then again on 2 weeks, and then finally at 6 weeks. And they should be about 40, 50% better after phase 1, and then almost 80, 90 after phase 2. The program should be sustainable across all therapists, and we started with a single therapist, and then we've moved on to almost a team of 12 therapists in the city. And it ought to be scalable. So for the athletes, they will come back for a phase 3 higher program, which is more forceful and involves plyometrics and advanced planks and such stuff. The intake is assessment based. So since I select the patients and I probably think that I select the right patient should go for rehab and not the ones that have tears and neuropathy. So there are challenges. The challenges in shoulder rehab, each of us would have faced. How do you rehabilitate a patient in the presence of pain? So most patients, we try avoid analgesics because then the onus is on the therapist. And then the patient also, after 2 weeks, if he's 50% better, he will realize that his pure improvement is from the exercise and nothing else, and then likely to comply and stick to the program. We believe some of these are ungrateful muscles which do not automatically respond, and I'll dwell upon this in the slide ahead. I wish we could have measured proprioception, because those therapists who have proprioceptive skills or who can impart proprioception, those are the patients who will recover very quickly. And that's why some patients just chart a fantastic recovery, and there are others who are stragglers and will continue to recover pedantically. Of course, without the scapula, no shoulder program is successful across the world, and we understand, we give that due importance to the scapula as such. And because we are, as I said, give a finite timeline, the challenge is that therapist has to do his best in those 2 weeks, which usually invariably they do in our setup. As far as compliance is concerned, we keep telling our team that if they can impart function and they can mitigate the pain purely with an exercise program, that patient will have complete motivation to come in, and there's no reason why they should drop out. We do have dropouts. There are difficult patients. There are patients who have their own agenda as well. But by and large, we're saying that 80, 90% of the patients would do well. I think over the 20 years of practice, I've learned that just because you're giving an X amount of exercise doesn't mean that that muscle will recruit. I think there is zero rocket science involved in rehabilitating a knee, in strengthening quadriceps, because there's no challenge there at all. It's a uniaxial joint, and when you give an extension exercise, it has to impart that to the quadriceps. But muscles like transversus abdominis, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, VMO, and the tibialis posterior are very challenging, and doesn't mean that just because you're giving the exercises, they will recruit. So you have to dig deeper as a therapist to ensure that your exercises are recruiting the right muscles and not causing any compensation. Here again, most of you will agree that those are research-oriented and modern therapists will agree that there is no entity like fibromyalgia. It's vague, there is no specific definition to this, and we don't believe that fibromyalgia exists at all. We know the yeoman's contribution that Kibler has done towards introducing the scapula to every rehab program, and all across the world, all of us do understand that the scapula has to work there. Since this is your forte and you understand this better than I do, I don't need to dwell upon the science of scapula and the contribution of Ben Kibler, who remains a hero for us. But Kibler did describe 5 types of chronic causes of pain, and we must understand that every shoulder condition, whatever, whether it's impingement, whether it's a calcification, whether it's rotator cuff tendinosis, bursitis, it will involve some scapular dyskinesia to some extent, 100%. And when you have a scapular dyskinesia, it's altered biomechanics. And so you get all these trigger points and fibromyalgias. The smart therapists who can recruit the rotator cuff and prior to that can restore the scapular kinesis will ensure that these aches and pains and fibromyalgias will get over. So we don't address these specifically. We look at the root cause fundamentals and we set that up. So looks can be deceiving, doesn't appear. So just because somebody has neck pain or tennis elbow doesn't mean that they have a local problem here. We started working on proximal inadequacy leading to distal decompensation conditions back in 2008, 2009. In fact, I stopped my tennis elbow injections back in 2007. And since we are aware of the victims and culprits approaches, we hit upon that. We realized that PSRP is sorting out so many other issues that we applied those same principles to the lower limb for tender Achilles and Peskilin valgus and tibialis posterior incompetence. And in 2009, I came across and chanced upon Dr. Janda. So Vladimir Janda is an absolute maverick. He from Czechoslovakia. He's an eminent neurologist, and his contribution to musculoskeletal pain is amazing. And when I chanced upon him in 2009, we realized that we shared so many common concepts. and we agreed on most of things. Unfortunately, he's no more. But if anybody who's a therapist worth his salt and who's not come across Vladimir Yada's work on functional training should really go back and study, and we are seriously inspired by his contribution. So this is where the victims and culprits approach was discovered, and when we realized that a weak rotator cuff will lead to other dysfunctions distally. And so instead of treating a local trigger finger and Tickerwin's tenosynovitis, we rather fix the proximal pathology first, and the distal will automatically fall in place. So these are several case scenarios. We'll go through all of these. You understand most of these. Let me quickly go through the PSRP program, which is, you can say, the idiot's guide to shoulder rehabilitation. So this is the definition of PSRP, a low resistance, high repetition, sub-impingement range of isotonic scapular muscle rotator cuff strengthening. Pretty much common principle to all shoulder rehab programs as such. Ours is a deficit-based approach, but the fundamentals remain the same. Because we do a 2-week robust phase 1 supervised for everybody, I know that is not feasible in the West, but here we don't trust our patients to do the exercise. I can't conceive that a patient sees the exercise once and does that exactly at home because there's so much of compensation involved. So as I said, it's a structured supervised program, and we improvise on 3 fronts: the pain, range of movement, and strength. But a key feature of PSRP remains the supervised program as such. We strictly don't like free weights because that is open chain and doesn't work well. We are completely devoted to using elastic resistance bands because they work the best and they're strength graded. But we spend a lot of time diligently trying to, let me just switch off the audio there. We spend a lot of time ensuring that compensations don't occur. And this therapist here is teaching the patient how to wear the band, use the sub-impingement, so not to go into abduction over 90 degrees. And this you must have seen, this is a bindi treatment. So these are the red dots that Indian ladies will wear on their forehead. We allow patients to wear these here because this is a reminder that they need to do their bracing. Otherwise, they lose the posture by evening. So some of the difficult MDI patients will be given. So these are adjuncts that we use to enhance their compliance as such. Again, I won't go into why bands, why no police, because given your forte, you understand much better than I do. But in the shoulder, there's a lot of compensation, and that's why here she's showing us the Euro grip. We must ensure that the bands don't cross the wrist because the wrist will hyperextend, create new points of pain, and you got to ensure that they measure the length so that the muscle is strengthened along its lines of stress, and at the same time, the peak forces should be in mid-range and not in the end range. So all our exercises are devised like that. I can't go through all the detailed PSRP program because it's a whole day workshop course here. And just to finish off, I'm going to introduce another controversy. I know that the literature is sold out on Fulcan being a better recruiter of supraspinatus, but I think they've got it all wrong. We are completely convinced that it's the MTCAN that works best on supraspinatus because all these studies have tested their movements in 90 degrees and above or full abduction. Now that's inconceivable that the supra can maintain that. So it is disingenuous to go above 30, 40 degrees. So all our patients will strengthen the supraspinatus in MTCAN in spite of the literature in support of the Fulcan because we are picking holes in all this. So this is a FDG PET study, very nicely designed. But again, all their testing is done at 90 degrees. This is where a whole lot of deltoid, whole lot of trapezius is going to come in. The supraspinatus starts getting suppressed after 60, 70 degrees here. The most important feature of PSRP is the review. So we review them on day 1. After 2 weeks, we do the UCL scoring. And then at the end of 6 weeks, we do another scoring. There are several adjuncts here. We don't handle subscapularis because that, again, creates a force couple that is way in favor of the internal rotators. But there are exceptions. So as in medicine, nothing is absolute. So in patients with slap tears, we know that subscap fatigue is a feature. They will get a subscap strengthening program. In subscap repair patients that I have done, they will get a subscap program. We are not so good on stretches. We don't think that stretching before strengthening is a good idea. So we are very minimal on stretching as such. Post-op role of external rotation is restricted when we're dealing with 4-part fractures, of the proximal humerus, especially in the presence of hemiarthroplasty. And again, because we don't go above 40, 50 degrees of abduction in the scapular plane, our deltoid is not a problem. So we don't like deltoid recruiting. So finally, last few slides here. This lady is the inspiration for the PSRP. I started rehabilitating her when I started my practice. It's a long story, but she had the worst kind of scapular instability, and she suffered for 13 months before, and she had a lot of psychological issues by then because she'd run from pillar to post. And I sat down overnight and wrote up the PSRP, and in next week, I started giving her therapy myself. And then I devised the whole program and the tenets of PSRP. And within 2.5 weeks, this baby could start her movement, stabilize her scapula, and was pain-free. So I realized that it's not that so difficult. But these are some of our examples you're seeing a lady who's had 3 surgeries. She had a fixation, then she had a hemiarthroplasty. She's a young 48 lady, went completely wrong and came to us 3 years after all this. And then you would have thought that she hadn't slept a day and a lot of pain, a lot of dysfunction. Unfortunately, we had to do a reverse shoulder replacement because by the time she come, her whole biomechanics was gone for a toss. There was no greater tuberosity there. And so this was in a form of salvage. It's a good salvage looking at the way she's performed here. This is another patient here who's had simultaneous right shoulder, reverse shoulder replacement on the right side, and left shoulder cuff repair, same sitting simultaneously. And you would think that in 3 months' time, you would see such a good function. So this is not my surgical skill. It's a combination of the surgical skill complemented with a good shoulder rehab program. And these are, trust me, bilateral shoulder operated, same sitting, are very difficult patients to rehabilitate. Surgeons are reluctant to do Bankart repairs for super athletes, contact athletes. If there's no glenoid bone loss, we do not do a Lacage, we don't do bone procedures. I'm still sold out on the Bankart repair. And these are some of our patients who won silver medals at the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. They are mixed martial arts. And these have all undergone a Bankart repair. So if there's no bone loss, I would still do the conventional arthroscopic Bankart as such. So from the patient's point of view, the emphasis is on pain, get me pain relief. From a therapist's point of view, often I need to restore your range of movement. But from our team, I think our entire emphasis is strength of the rotator cuff. If you can recruit the rotator cuff, it means that joint has reached its biomechanically neutral status, and they will be able to restore the range of movement and pain automatically. The ranges and the pain will follow strengthening. It shouldn't be the other way around because that's counterintuitive as such. We are big proponents of early versus late rehab. I don't use a sling. All my post-op patients are free of their sling. I think the sling is my biggest enemy because it forces them into internal rotation. Is there evidence based on this? There is evidence published in favor of fast rehab and in favor of slow rehab both ways. So to each his own. I'm not disparaging the slow rehab therapists, but why disenfranchise 97% of patients just to save that 3% re-tear patients? So even our cuff repair patients and replacement patients will not wear the sling except when they're traveling or except at night. So finally, with the COVID disruption, we've moved to the online PSRP for several of our patients because post-op, we cannot neglect them, and it has gone very well. And so I think we are charting the next chapter. Final slide. It is important for the therapist and the surgeon to be one-to-one. They have to have a sync, and we are very good on that because we talk it out and our therapists understand orthopedics much better, and we try to understand their physio concepts equally well so that we can collectively give them a good rehab. In conclusion, I think I've shared the frozen shoulder biomechanics. I've quickly shared some of our basic tenets of PSRP. Please understand the victims and culprits, and that's why we don't give steroid injections for tennis elbow and decurvents as far as possible. I don't remember the last time I've done that. And we are great advocates of early rehab for our patients. Here in the picture, you see one therapist and one surgeon leaning against each other, supporting each other. I leave it to your judgment, which one is the therapist, which one is the surgeon as such. Thank you very much for your patience and attention. Thank you, really appreciate this.